Here we go. So yeah, as Michael said, I'm a principal research scientist at the Wikimedia Foundation. I've been working there since about 2011, which was actually about halfway through my PhD, just doing a little bit of contracting work with them and then eventually becoming a full-time staff member. This, by the way, is my profile page on Wikipedia, and so that's why I'm showing you that. So before we get into what I want to talk to you about today, I want to give you a little bit of context. Planet Earth, about 7 billion people. This data is actually from March 2012, so a little bit more than the figure that you see up there. The number of Wikipedia readers on a monthly basis is about 500 million. So it's about 1 in 10. About 1 in 10 people, planet Earth, read Wikipedia at least once a month. But the number of people who edit Wikipedia is about 110,000, and that's about a 1 to 10,000 relationship. And I want you to know there actually is a dot right there. It's kind of hard to maybe see from the back of the room. And you should know that that dot is actually way too big. It's really hard to make a dot that's smaller than a pixel on a pixelated surface, and so you should just know that's a really tiny dot for a reason. So I want to zoom into this little area quick and show you a little bit about what's going on right here. So the number of people who edit Wikipedia, I showed you before, is about 100,000 editors. The number of people who work at the Wikimedia Foundation is about 250 people. This was 225 back in 2012, but it's grown very slowly over time. And we're about 1 to 1,000 with the number of volunteers who are working on Wikipedia. So we're a very, very tiny organization for something that's relatively big, at least sort of global scale. So the research at the research team at the Wikimedia Foundation is actually about 6 people, and you can sort of compare this to like we're about the same size, at least as far as traffic and interest from the internet, as Google. Google has, I actually have no idea, but I would guess that it's more on the scale of maybe 600 people in their research group. And so you'll notice that I'm not actually listed along with the other researchers here because I sort of started a spin-off team within the same organization called the Scoring Platform Team. I'll tell you a little bit more about what that means later. But essentially, I have a couple engineers who are working with me on a specific project that we're going to talk about today. Okay, so on to the actual story that I want to tell you. And so if you don't give many presentations, I'm going to give you a pro tip right now, and that's you should have 3 things in each of your presentations. It doesn't matter if you actually have 3 things to talk about, and you should just pretend that it's 3. So first, I'm going to talk to you about Wikipedia as a socio-technical system. I'm going to bring in a little bit of systems thinking and biological metaphors. Then I want to talk to you about this critique of the quality control system in Wikipedia, which is the story that Michael was just telling you about. But I'm going to pull in a lot of the stuff that wasn't in my thesis to talk about like how I think Wikipedia got to this place. I'm going to bring in a little bit of feminist theory with standpoint epistemology, and I want to talk about the way that we encode our ideologies and the technologies that we build. And then finally, I want to talk to you about infrastructure for socio-technical change. I'll introduce this term as a progress catalyst. And I want to talk to you about the dangers that we can get into around having algorithms operate in social spaces and how we might actually be able to design to mitigate those problems. Okay, so part 1, the socio-technical of Wikipedia. So let's start off with, what is Wikipedia anyway? Well, obviously, it's an enormous encyclopedia. It's the world's largest, arguably, with about 5.5 million articles in English Wikipedia. And I was just in Rio giving a talk about this, and so I wanted to include that there are about 1 million articles in Portuguese. You know, it's just enormous. This is something that you probably already know. So it's obviously also a wiki. And a wiki is an interesting thing because it flips the publication model where you publish first and review later. This is totally strange compared to how every other type of publishing system works. And beyond that, in Wikipedia, anybody can edit and we share authorship. And so there's actually a policy in Wikipedia against stating or behaving as though you own an article. You have to share authorship with other people. They have to be allowed to edit the article too. It's also an online community. I was telling you before, there's about 100,000 active editors who are working in this space. They do a lot of the things that other online communities do, like set up forums. So in English Wikipedia, they call their forums village pumps. And so, for example, they have one for discussing policies, one for discussing technical issues, proposals, etc. They also have subject matter interest groups. So, for example, Wiki Project Video Games focuses on making sure that the articles in Wikipedia about video games are high quality. Same thing with Wiki Project Medicine for the articles about medicine. There's lots of these. So But I'm a computer scientist, and so when I look at Wikipedia, I want to put it in terms of a system with inputs and outputs. In this case, the input is available human attention, and the output is encyclopedia material. And this is really cool for me because I can talk about the efficiency. How much output are we getting per unit input? So how much encyclopedia material are we getting based on the same level of available human attention? And so I want to make the argument that Wikipedia is a socio-technical system. And in order to do this, I want to define this term. So to define this term, I want to talk to you about the history of socio-technical systems from my point of view. So when computer systems were relatively new, they mostly would appear in an office setting. You'd have like a dumb terminal hooked up to a mainframe. It would allow you to do some things like maybe set up the payroll system or something like that at an organization. And really we would see social things happening next to technical things, these technical computer systems. But after a while we realized that we could actually start doing some of those social things with the technical things. So at the very bottom of the screen here, I have some very old calendar app and a very old mail app. And so these were examples of where we could help out communication, we could help out scheduling, getting people to the same place at the same time using technologies. And so we realized that technical can support social. Interesting. But when I say socio-technical, I'm talking about something that's much more tightly integrated than that. And that's the space that I think that Wikipedia and a lot of other online communities and technical systems actually operate. And so I'm a technologist. But for just a minute, to make this point, I'm going to pretend to be a technobiologist. Any biologists in the room? All right, I can get away with murder. OK, so on the screen I have for you a couple sketches that I've made. These are actually up on Commons, open license if you like them. So of a bacterium and a paramecium. So this bacterium is way too big. It's really important that I explain that to you. If you were a biologist, you would look at this and go, well, that's not to scale. Because a bacterium would be so small, it would actually be smaller than those little bits of poop that are coming out of the paramecium right there. You would barely be able to see the bacterium next to the paramecium. And what I really want to convey to you right now is that these two single-celled organisms operate at massively different scales. Bacterium is really, really simple. It's basically just like a little sack of salt water. It's got some DNA floating around in it. There's some little specks in it, these ribosomes that help transcribe DNA to proteins. And then I guess there's a few vacuoles, which are these sort of like little fat bubbles, but really nothing very complicated there. Really just a little ball of salt water. But a paramecium is a massively complex, huge thing. It's got really cool things like 2 different nuclei. It has this really cool thing called a contractile vacuole, which is how a paramecium can survive in freshwater environments. If you know anything about osmosis, you'll know that if you take a freshwater sack of water and you put it into, or sorry, a saltwater sack of water and you put it into a freshwater lake, it will explode because all the water wants to come rushing into the salty environment. The way that the paramecium deals with this is it has a pump. There's actually that contractile vacuole is constantly pumping whenever the paramecium is in fresh water, and that's how it survives. If that pump ever shuts off, it'll explode. So when I think about a paramecium and a bacterium, I think about social systems and the scales in which they can operate. And so at the bacterium end of the scale, we have a small fishing village, less than 100 people, maybe 150 people. And at the scale of paramecium, we have something that's like a city, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people, or something like Wikipedia, which operates at that kind of scale. Has anybody here ever heard of Dunbar's number? Yeah, right. I don't usually get that many people when I give this kind of talk who have heard of Dunbar's number, but I appreciate that you have because I think it's really cool. So Dunbar was a social scientist. I don't know if that's fair to call him that. But anyway, he was a researcher who is studying populations of people. And he was looking at fishing villages like the photo that I have on the screen right now. And one of the things that he noticed is that a fishing village generally doesn't get above 150 people. Whenever it does get above 150 people, it'll have sort of like a civil war, and a group of people will leave the fishing village and go start a new fishing village. And so he was wondering like why this upper bound of about 150 people. And I think what Dunbar was running into is that if you have a group of people without the infrastructure to allow them to operate at a larger scale, the largest scale that they can operate just using their relationships with each other is about 150. Where on Wikipedia's end of the scale, that's where we're getting into these interesting substructures. And so before I move on, I want to make this point really clear about, like, when I say socio-technical, I'm talking about how the social, which I would put in the case of this paramecium, which is basically, if you tried to imagine a paramecium that was just a sack of salt water, that's sort of like saying a large group of people with nothing to support them. In this case, I have a photo of Wikimania, one of the yearly conferences that we have for Wikipedia stuff. And then in the critical subsystems that allow it to operate at scale, in the case of the paramecium, these organelles, but in the case of Wikipedia, technologies like MediaWiki, policies, guidelines, and rules, and robots and tools that people build in order to make the system come together and function. And so when I say socio-technical, and I'm talking about the merge between social and technical, I'm really actually talking about this paramecium. That if you were a biologist and you were studying this paramecium, you couldn't just study the saltwater sac separate from the organelles and understand what's going on with the paramecium. You have to study them together. In the same way that if you're studying Wikipedia, you have to study social processes and the technologies that enact those social processes together in order to understand what's going on at all. So that's what I mean with socio-technical. And now I want to talk to you about the specialized subsystems of Wikipedia, because I think Wikipedia only operates at this scale because it has these specialized subsystems. So I'm going to split these into 5. These are just the way that I view things. They're not there's no truth to this. I just think it's a useful lens. So if you're a Wikipedia and you're going to operate at scale, the first thing that you need to do is allocate work. We can't have everybody working on the same thing. It would be better if we had people working on the most important things first. In Wikipedia, we should write the article about chemistry before we write the article about Breaking Bad. Actually, that's sort of up for debate because Breaking Bad is very popular. So we largely get this for free due to Linus's law. And when I say Linus's law, I'm not actually talking about the Linus's law that was formulated by Linus, the Linux kernel developer. I'm talking about the Linus's law that comes from Eric Raymond, another open source luminary, which is stated simply, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. And so what Eric was talking about is that in an open source context, if you have a lot of people look at a problem, like maybe a bug in a piece of software, for one person, they're going to be able to see, oh, I can fix that bug really easily. I know exactly what's causing this. They're going to be able to see into the system and be able to fix it. And so the critical insight in here is that visibility is critical to open collaboration. That when you have a bunch of people who can work on something and they can see what's happening, they can see the problem, see the potential contributions, then you can sort of optimize the situation where the right person will find the thing that's easiest for them to contribute to. And so my corollary for Wikipedia is that given enough people see an incomplete article, all potential contributions to that article will be easy for somebody. Turns out that this works in theory. And by the way, these are citations in the right-hand side, just a little bit of what I think is useful literature for understanding this. It works in theory. It's part of the process of becoming a Wikipedian. We can actually support this kind of visibility with technological interventions like recommender systems. And really bad things happen when we take it away, which we do accidentally sometimes, wonderful natural experiments. Okay, on to the next subsystem. You're going to have to regulate behavior. The entire internet can edit Wikipedia. You don't even have to register an account. We're going to have to form some norms. We're going to have to propagate them, and we're going to have to enforce them. So if you search Wikipedia governance in Google Scholar, you're going to get a crap load of results. Google thinks that it's going to give you 37,000 results. However, that's not exactly true because it's an estimate. But if you scroll down to page 10, which I encourage you to do right now if you want to check me on this, you'll find out that there's so much literature about Wikipedia's governance that you get to page 10, there's still articles about Wikipedia and governance structures. So I just want to tell you about how Wikipedians do this. So let's say that you have an idea for a new rule in Wikipedia, a new norm. Well, it might be that you're prescribing something, like we don't do this and we should do this. Or maybe you're just describing something that already happens. We've been doing this thing this particular way. We should make a rule about that so people know the ways that we do things. And so those are 2 different types of norms that Wikipedians like to talk about. So take your idea and write an essay about it. Explain what it is. Make a wiki page. Put it on Wikipedia. Not in the article space. There's other spaces for policies and that sort of stuff. And once you think it's ready, then you file a request for comments and people will discuss the merits of this idea, whether it should be enacted as a rule or not. If it passes that threshold, it becomes what we refer to as a policy or a guideline. If it doesn't cross that threshold, then it just goes back to being an essay. You could do some work on it, file another request for comments, or just leave it as an essay. So this sort of forms a divide between informal and formal policies in Wikipedia. Formal policies being the actual rules, and informal policies being things that people talk about and share with each other but aren't exactly formal rules. And so I want to give you a couple examples of some informal and formal rules, my two favorites. So my favorite informal rule is don't stuff beans up your nose, which is actually not about putting beans up your nose. It's about not telling other people not to put beans up their nose because maybe they haven't thought about that yet. It's really, don't tell the vandals not to do something they haven't done because, haha, now they know to do that. Anybody who has kids will know that if you tell your kids not to put beans in their nose, they're going to be like, wait a second, beans will fit in my nose? And then they're going to put beans in their nose. Okay, so example of a formalized rule is verifiability. Wikipedia is not truth. Wikipedia is verifiable. I'm quoting Jimmy Wales in this, but I think it's a really good summary of what this says. If Wikipedia tried to be truth, the end all of truth, the debates would never stop. And so instead, what Wikipedia is information that can be verified with an external reference. And this is, I believe, what allowed Wikipedia to grow at the rate that it has, because arguments stop on what you can cite. Okay. So fun story, you can look at these growth and regulations and see some really interesting patterns. This dark line on the top is the rate of growth for new essays, and the dashed lines of two different types are those formalized policies, those guidelines and policies, those formalized norms. And the fun thing is that you can see that in 2006, Wikipedia stopped formalizing new rules at the rate that it used to be formalizing new rules. But the rate of growth of essay writing went through the roof. And so there was definitely a switch that was happening here where people were doing a lot of reflecting on what's going on in Wikipedia, but maybe not turning that into new rules. Okay. So now I want to get to the quality control system. If you're going to open a web page to the internet, you're going to have to identify and remove damage. Obviously, vandalism is a big deal in Wikipedia. So I think that mostly this system, like, it gets a lot for free from Linus's law, that given enough people see an article, somebody's going to be able to see the damage in that article and be able to fix it. But in order to operate at the massive scale that Wikipedia has to operate, Wikipedians have built two types of automated systems to help them manage quality control at scale. I like to separate these into fully automated quality control systems like ClueBot in English Wikipedia, which uses a machine learning model to detect vandalism in Wikipedia. It only works for obvious vandalism, but it's really fast. It'll revert the vandalism generally about 5 seconds after it's saved. For anything that makes it past ClueBot, that'll get picked up when in one of the semi-automated quality control systems. They also use machine learning models so that they can sort edits by the likelihood that they're damaging, so that people can review the most likely to be damaging things first. It's still really fast because with a semi-automated system, a human computation system, you can have the machine do all of the work that the human isn't good at, and then just show a human a diff and ask them to make a judgment. Yes or no, is this good or is this bad? And most vandalism can be caught at a glance, so this works really well. And what's really cool about Wikipedia is all these systems work together, the fully automated quality control tools, the semi-automated quality control tools, and people just running into vandalism as they're reading Wikipedia. It turns out that Wikipedia has a bunch of tools that builds like distributed documentation structure so that nobody has to talk to anybody to find out that, oh, this person's been vandalizing Wikipedia for a while and should be reported to the administrator's notice board. Nobody actually makes the decision, I'm going to report this person to the administrator's notice board. That just happens automatically through people using the tools in Wikipedia. And the fun thing is that together, these two strategies of reverting vandalism when you see it and reporting vandals to be banned from Wikipedia forms something that I think looks like a lot like an animal immune system with innate characteristics, which are fast, general, and local. That's, you get an infection, say, on your arm, it'll swell up because your immune system is trying to attack the local problem. It's really fast, it'll happen right away, it works anywhere on your body. It's general. However, this adaptive side, and this is usually what we mean when we say immunity, is it's slow. It takes a little while to build up an immunity. It's specific to a particular pathogen. You've got to get this strain of the cold. A new strain of the cold won't be picked up. And it's global. It works across the entire system. You're not going to get a cold in your hand anymore because you've dealt with the cold all over your body. And this is like banning vandals in Wikipedia. I don't think it's a coincidence that Wikipedia's strategy for dealing with pathogens looks a lot like animal biology's strategy for dealing with pathogens. Okay, so on to community management. We're going to get a bunch of newcomers, arguably the most newcomers that any organization has ever gotten on a daily basis. We're going to have to socialize them, we're going to have to train them, and we're going to have to deal with disputes that people have. So Wikipedia gets 6,000 newcomers a day. Is there any other organization in the world that gets 6,000 newcomers a day? I don't know. Like, it depends on how you define organization, right? So we've got to route them. So we have a tool called hostbot in English Wikipedia. The job of this bot is to identify newcomers who are obviously vandals and basically just leave them alone because we already have ways of dealing with them, but find the people who are obviously not vandals and route them to newcomer help spaces like the Tea House, which is a question and answer space for new editors to get help with dealing with the complexities of Wikipedia when they first show up. Finally, I want to talk about a system that you might not have guessed, which is the reflection and adaptation system of Wikipedia. Wikipedia is no centralized governance system. So Wikipedians, as a collective, needs to ask and answer questions like, where are we going? Where do we want to go? And how do we want to get there? So I was showing you before about how Wikipedia's governance system works, and I was showing you the rate at which new policies were formalized. I think that formalizing policies are very clearly an adaptive process, whereas writing essays are very clearly a reflective process, where people are asking questions and thinking about what should happen. And I think it's maybe concerning that it looks like Wikipedia is not adapting as fast as it used to be, despite the fact that it still does have some problems, which I'll be telling you about in a little bit. So coming back to why I gave you this biological metaphor in the first place is that, I mean, if you were to look at paramecium and see it as, a sack of salt water or maybe a collection of chemicals just running into each other, you wouldn't get the whole picture. And it's really important that you actually look at the whole thing in order to understand what's going on with the paramecium. In the same way, when you look at what's going on in Wikipedia, the kind of problems that it has, you shouldn't just look at the immediate context of that problem. You should ask yourself, how does this whole system enact this problem? And how might the whole system enact a solution? How can we get the people and their culture, the tools that they're using, the bots that people develop to change in a way that will make the system work better, to be more efficient, to get more output per input, more encyclopedia material per human attention. Okay, so on to the critique of algorithmic quality control systems. Let's dig into how one of these subsystems is going a little wonky. So this is the graph that Michael was telling you about. Actually, it's not even an updated version of the graph. It's actually the exact graph that comes from this paper that I have a citation for you here. I want to just walk you through the results of this paper using this graph really quickly and help you get some context for what Wikipedians were experiencing. So this graph shows you the number of active editors who are working on Wikipedia on a regular basis over time. So in the early days of Wikipedia, leading up till about 2004, most of the infrastructure of Wikipedia, most of the subsystems were formed by humans and practices. They didn't have a way of formalizing rules. They didn't have very many bots that ran on the system. They didn't have advanced algorithmic tools to help them with quality control. It was really just people forming the basic infrastructure of Wikipedia. Wikipedia was a lot like a fishing village at this time. But between 2004 and 2007, I like to refer to this as the exponential growth period, everything turned into a fire hose. Suddenly there's thousands of newcomers showing up, thousands of new pages being created every day, and hundreds of thousands of new edits to articles that we already have. We have to deal with this and deal with vandalism and damage and that sort of stuff. And so Wikipedians made quality control tools that I told you about before, like Huggle, which is one of those semi-automated tools, and Cluebot, which is one of the fully automated tools, to help them deal with this issue. That all happened during the end of the exponential growth period. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the key technologies that are inside of these tools. So the key technology that I see is the machine classifier. Essentially what this does is it takes a bunch of statistics about what happened in an edit, like was the person who saved the edit anonymous, how many words did they add from a bad words list, like racial slurs and curse words, repeated characters are really common, like people like to vandalize Wikipedia by going K, 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 I don't know why, but they'll just fill an entire line with the letter K, and so these statistics will go into the machine learning model. The machine learning model will figure out some correlations between those statistics and if an edit is vandalism or not, and then it'll be able to make a prediction using some hidden strategy for doing that. And the really cool thing is you can take one of these machine learning models and you can take the fire hose of 160,000 edits that English Wikipedia gets every day, and you can split it into the 10% of edits that need review and the 90% of edits that don't need review. So just to put this into some numbers and people for you, so without machine prediction, reviewing 160,000 edits per day, if you stayed up all night and you drank a lot of caffeine and you didn't go to the bathroom would take 100 or 267 hours. And that's about 33 people working 8 hours a day without a break. But with machine prediction, we can cut that down to 16,000 edits per day. Still a large number, but that would only take about 27 hours, somewhere between 3 and 4 people spending 8 hours a day looking at this. And so this was a massively useful technology for allowing Wikipedia to operate at the scale during this exponential period. So moving on in the story, something went wrong. During this decline phase, we see an abrupt change from an exponential growth period to a relatively steady decline. So the big question that I was dealing with in this work was, what the heck happened there? Like, how did this happen? There were a bunch of hypotheses at the time. We might get into some of those in the questions, but I want to tell you about the hypothesis that I think has still failed to be refuted many years later. But in order to tell you about what I think was going on here, I want to talk to you about what Wikipedians were experiencing at the time and how we can see them encoding their experience and view of the world into the technologies that they built here. In order to do that, I want to talk to you about these terms, standpoint and objectivity. In order to do this, I'm going to be channeling one of my favorite feminist scholars, Donna Haraway. Donna Haraway was a researcher who studied scientists who were studying apes. An ape studying apes studying apes. So what she did is she split the scientists, the research labs that she was looking at into 2 groups, the male scientists and female scientists. And I put a star next to female scientists because really what she was looking at were research groups that were very patriarchal in their structure and research groups that were sort of informed by the feminism critique of patriarchal structures at the time. So these are two discrete groups of scientists who are looking at the exact same thing, the exact same observations of ape behavior, yet they asked really different questions, learned different things about what was going on with ape behavior. The patriarchal scientists were really interested in evolutionary patterns, so they asked questions about reproductive competition and dominance, which apes had sex with which other apes and how was that organized within their social structure. Whereas the female or feminist scientists instead asked questions about communication and social grooming, like how do social circles form in ape behavior. So now back to defining these terms. So a standpoint gives you a view of what's important and valuable in the world. Do you want to answer questions about communication patterns, or do you want to look at dominance patterns and sexual selection? Your objectivity is what you construct in order to reify this value. In the case of the scientists, these were the methods. Were they measuring grooming patterns, like literally recording in a notebook, like when did this ape groom this other ape, and how often does that happen, and when does it happen? Or were you looking at sex partners? Same notebook, write down like, oh, this ape had sex with this other ape. Okay, interesting, let's put that into the data set. So that's the objectivity, how you reify this value. But the really critical insight that Donna Haraway had at the time, and I think that we benefit from now, is that standpoints and objectivities can be merged. Neither one of these questions or views on what was valuable is inherently better than the other. And we actually benefit from merging the two together. And so if you were to look at a textbook on ape behavior right now, you would learn something about both reproductive competition and communication and social grooming patterns. The fact that we had people looking from different point of views and thinking about different things as valuable, turning those into different methodologies to answer different questions, benefits us with a broader understanding of ape behavior. Okay, so let's pull that back to Wikipedia and talk about the standpoint that people in Wikipedia had during the exponential growth period. So at the time, they see, holy cow, Wikipedia has become a fire hose. We need to revert the bad edits as they're coming in into Wikipedia. And we want to minimize the effort that we waste doing this quality control work. We don't want to spend 267 hours every day wasting, reverting vandalism. So the objectivity, the thing that they brought about in order to reify this value were the technologies that they put in place in the time based on machine learning models that were able to reduce their workload dramatically. And this was a massive success. And so right now you can sort of look at the internet has a fire hose going into Wikipedia. That fire hose gets filtered through these quality control tools that reduce the workload by about 90%, and then it actually makes it to Wikipedia. That's not quite right because it's published first, but it's really hard to draw a diagram with a loop, so think about it that way. It wasn't until 2009 that somebody was looking at a graph that was very similar to this and said, whoa, holy cow, we're not growing exponentially anymore, we're actually declining now. And it's not the experienced editors that are leaving and getting tired. You know, they edit Wikipedia for a while, now they're bored, they go do something else. It's the newcomers, the ones who are showing up really excited, want to edit Wikipedia, they're not sticking around anymore. This was Banwan Sa and his collaborators at Palo Alto Research Center. Singularity is not near, one of the critical bits of literature about Wikipedia. So it took us a while to figure out what the heck was going on, because there were a lot of hypotheses that were going on in this space, like maybe Wikipedia is running out of stuff to write about, or maybe Wikipedia shouldn't be that big and it's actually just shrinking down to the size that it really ought to be. It took us until about 2012 for us to realize, holy cow, in the standpoint that we brought to developing the technologies and practices that we put in place, we forgot about the value of socializing the newcomers. It turns out that when you split the 160,000 edits that are coming into Wikipedia, the vast majority of the stuff that needs review and is maybe damaging is actually newcomers who just aren't quite getting it right their first time editing Wikipedia. It's actually a tiny little fraction of that bad stuff that's actually vandals who are trying to bring harm to Wikipedia, yet they're lumped into the same bucket. They're actually sent the exact same warning messages, stop vandalizing Wikipedia or we're going to ban you. And so by making the subsystem for quality control boosted and much bigger and much more powerful, it actually ended up sort of squashing the community management subsystem of Wikipedia. And Wikipedians ended up throwing out the baby with the bathwater, quite literally. So hey, now that we know this, maybe we should also value newcomers having a good experience and design for that. Great. So let's review our standpoint. We're going to extend it. So Wikipedia is still a fire hose. That's still true. Bad edits need to be reverted. And we would like to minimize the effort wasted on doing quality control work. But yeah, now we actually also want to socialize and train the newcomers. Great. So in the time period between 2012 and 2015, and I'll explain why I'm talking about 2015 in just a moment, the conversation around Wikipedia incorporates this new standpoint. So there's major foundation or Wikimedia Foundation goals around encouraging newcomers to stick around and continue to edit Wikipedia. The newcomer help spaces like the one that I talked about, the Tea House, was developed around this time to make it easier for newcomers to get around the complex rule structure that Wikipedia has. So win, right? You know, like we extended our standpoint, we got new objectivities, is great. Well, so it turns out that this part of the system, the filtering part of the system that stands between the internet and Wikipedia, didn't really change that much. And I'm going to pick on one of the quality control tools here, but I want you to know that this story actually applies to all of the quality control tools that are in this space. So I'm going to pick on Huggle. So before I get into the critique, I want to start with the sugar. I give this kind of talk a lot to people who develop these tools, and it's important that you don't tell them that everything is bad. And I want you to know that everything about Huggle is not bad. Huggle is actually an amazing piece of software, and I have no doubt that it represents the state-of-the-art in distributed quality control. I talk to people at Facebook, Google, Quora about how they do quality control, and they're 10 years behind us. Like, Huggle is what they have. It's not Huggle, but it looks exactly like Huggle. This software and its users are responsible for critical work. Without them, Wikipedia would have totally tanked a long time ago. Its developers and its users are wonderful people. I know a lot of them personally, and we owe a lot to them, like we do, because we benefit from Wikipedia. So let me take this opportunity to say thank you to them. Now the medicine. So in 2009, when we first figured out that Wikipedia was declining, this is what Huggle looked like. So you can see there's like a pane on the right-hand side here. It shows a diff, two versions of an encyclopedia article with the changes that happened there. In this case, somebody was removing the text. She smells like bad body odor. And so this was actually, somebody was cleaning up vandalism here. And so this was a good edit. And so in order to do something about this, I would click one of these two buttons in the upper left-hand corner here. There's a bad button that reverts it and sends a warning message to them, and a good button that actually just does nothing. It just moves you on to the next edit. There's no like, hey, thanks for a good edit or anything like that that comes out of clicking the good button. On the left-hand side here, we have edits sorted by the probability that they're damaging based on that machine learning model, so that you review the stuff that's probably bad first and review the probably less bad stuff later. And in 2009, we had this big revelation that newcomers were getting hammered by these kind of tools. So in 2015, there was a major redesign of the Huggle software. And I talked to the developer of Huggle quite a lot about like the problems with the software, with how people use it, how it wasn't designed for these sort of things. And so I want to show you how the software changed. So you can see there's still this sort of diff pane where it's showing 2 versions of the article with the changes. There's still these good and bad buttons at the top. And there's still this list here of probably bad stuff to probably less bad. You know, there's some rounder corners and there's some gradients. It actually runs on more operating systems. They have a way better development process. And they did add a welcome button. But I would say this tool isn't really designed to use that welcome button. And so as far as I can tell, nobody's actually clicked on that button except for when they were running a test. So the tool isn't really designed with newcomer socialization in mind, but it does have a button with newcomer socialization in mind. So the state of the matter is that quality control in Wikipedia is still not designed with this in mind. Newcomers, and especially those who don't look like the people who joined during the first big wave into Wikipedia, remain marginalized. You know, if you don't speak like them, if you don't value the same things that they do, then they'll see you as sketchy, at least different, and needing review. And so we're still not seeing gains in the retention of good faith newcomers. Despite the fact that we've incorporated a lot of conversations into the space, quality control is just the first thing to hit you when you show up at Wikipedia, way before you get invited to the tea house by HostBot. So why did this happen? Why did we adjust our objectivities in other places, but not in the technologies that were developed to do quality control work? So why do we see changes in some of the subsystems of Wikipedia, but not others? So this is what brings me into the third part of my talk, the infrastructure for socio-technical change, what I think is missing from our ability to change in this space. So like I was telling you before, I think the machine classifier is really critical to these systems. It uses statistics to make predictions about which edits are good and bad. The 3 main quality control tools in Wikipedia are Huggle, Cluebot, and Sticky. Huggle and Sticky solve a very similar problem. But they're both used at about an even rate. So each of these quality control tools has its own machine learning model. Let's say that you had an idea, like you were inspired by my talk, and you're going to go out and you're going to write the next piece of quality control software for Wikipedia that's going to account for newcomer socialization. So you're going to take this extended standpoint and do something with it. The first thing that you're going to need to do is to build a machine learning model that works in real time in Wikipedia. So in order to do that, you should probably read about 20 research papers about Wikipedia damage detection. And if you're a volunteer developer for Wikipedia, you probably wouldn't get actual practical machine classification from your computer science degree. And honestly, you probably don't even have a computer science degree. Most tool developers who are working in this volunteer space don't. Even if you had all those things, building one of these things and making it work is extremely labor intensive. There are massive performance considerations. And so you'd probably just pull your hair out and give up. So it should be no surprise that all of these tools, all these 3 tools, are authored by computer scientists with extensive skills in machine learning and distributed systems. Sticky, for example, was authored by one of the most prolific authors of Wikipedia damage detection literature, Andrew West. So in order to talk about what I think is happening here, I want to introduce this reaction pathway graph that you might have seen in a chemistry class. Essentially what's going on here is we're talking about like how much energy do you have to put into a system in order to have a chemical reaction take place. So imagine frying an egg. Denaturing a protein isn't exactly a chemical reaction, but stick with me. So if you wanted the transparent egg whites to turn into actual white egg stuff, then you generally have to get it up to about 150 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you had a catalyst, some chemical that would make that reaction happen easier, then you could maybe fry an egg at room temperature. You wouldn't have to put so much energy into the system in order to get that reaction to take place. That's what's going on in this graph. So now I want to show you my version of this graph, which is a progress pathway graph. And so I think that there's essentially a reaction energy problem. If you want to get to the side of better quality control and socialization, you first have to cross this mountain of building a machine learning model that works in real time. But if we had some sort of progress catalyst, some sort of way to make this progress without putting so much energy into it, maybe we would actually get a lot more people crossing that mountain. And so this is what my team does. I was telling you I run the scoring platform team. What we do is we take this idea of the machine learning model and we centralize it. Because all these machine learning models that these different tools are doing, they're roughly doing the same thing in different languages using different algorithms, but honestly they're making the exact same prediction. And so they can all use the same central machine prediction system, and new tools like HostBot, the one that routes newcomers, Snuggle is another one that routes newcomers to help spaces, can use that prediction model too. And so if you have an idea, you can also take advantage of this centralized resource of a prediction model to build your tool on top of. And so I want to show you a little bit about how this works. We call this system ORS. It's a data mining metaphor. So anyway, so you can actually open this URL in your browser right now. It's going to our machine learning service. So in this URL, we're going to ask something about English Wikipedia. We're going to ask, is this edit causing damage to an article? And then we give it the number that represents the edit in Wikipedia, 638.307.884. And so in this case, this is an edit to an article where they're fixing a link. Wikipedians call this link disambiguation. They're making sure that when somebody clicks on The Old Woman in the page, it goes to The Old Woman, the play, as opposed to the page that says, hey, there's 10 things called The Old Woman. Which one do you want? So this is a good edit. We ask ORS to make a prediction about it. ORS says, oh, probably not damaging, false. And I'm about 94% likely that it's not damaging. Well, let's give it another edit. So this 642.215.410. So in this edit, somebody removed a reference. This is, by the way, an article on dog intelligence. Removing a reference, replacing it with llamas grow on trees, all caps. So we give that to ORS, and ORS says, oh, wow, yeah, that's probably damaging. About 92% likely that that's damaging. And so it's as simple as that. You can actually open this in your browser. You can send any edit from Wikipedia, and it'll make you a prediction in pretty quick time. Like I said, it's pretty fast. We're much, much faster than Cluebot because it turns out I have a background in computer science. I can do optimization for this sort of stuff. So we have a median delay of about a half a second as opposed to 5 seconds. The whole system is scalable and redundant. If we get a bunch of researchers who are using this for research, you should use this for your research. Then we'll add machines so that we can handle the new capacity. And because I've read those research papers, we can make these models comparable to the state of the art. So essentially what I hope that the system is a progress catalyst that reduces the necessary activation energy to getting to better quality control by about 20,000 lines of code and 1 advanced degree in computer science. And honestly, I've been working on the system for about 3 years now, so probably a lot of hours on top of that. And so my hope is that then we'll get a lot more people experimenting in this space, using this extended standpoint, experimenting with new objectivities that reify this value of better quality control, better support for newcomers. And fun story, Huggle's already crossed that gap. There's been a lot of tools that have already been developed in this space, about 30 of them. There's been 3 major Wikimedia Foundation product initiatives, and there's been a bunch of really cool data science projects. By the way, you should do research on this. It's really cool. Okay, so I told you that there were 3 things, but I wanted to have this part have its own section, and so it's 3.5. Feminist inspiration, like how we can use critiques of machine learning in social spaces in order to change the design of these systems. So I want to use this term, subjective algorithms, and I'm borrowing this from Zeynep Tufekci, that subjective algorithms are algorithms often aided by big data and now make decisions in subjective realms where there's no right decision and no anchor with which to judge outcomes, like what's good, what's relevant, what's important, what's desirable, and what's valuable. Actually, I don't want to talk about perspective API. Maybe we can come back to that. But in Wikimedia space, we have to deal with these questions all the time. And depending on how we answer these questions, we're deciding who's allowed to participate, who gets labeled bad faith, who has their edits reverted, who gets to contribute to Wikipedia. The machine can really have a dramatic effect on these sort of things, so we have to be careful. So this machine learning model, it's of course not perfect. In the case where it says that something's good, it's actually going to include some important bad stuff that it's going to make a mistake about. And when it says bad, it's actually going to include some important good stuff and that it makes mistakes about. But the real problem is when we do something more than that. We actually have a bias in place. And so I'm going to quote a Wikipedia editor about this problem. Please exercise extreme caution to avoid encoding racism and other biases into the AI scheme. And so essentially what WNT is talking about is, like, let's say we built a model for harassment in several discourse, but for some reason the harassment side of our model picked up messages from South Africans because the way that they use English is strange, and so therefore it's more likely to be harassment. Then we would be silencing a group of people who are already underrepresented on Wikipedia. So I want to tell you, actually I'm going to tell you one story because I don't have time, about how we detected some of this bias in Wikipedia and how we dealt with it. In this case, I'm going to talk to you about how we use the Italian, or how we picked up the Italian word and actually we might have a little bit of time, so I might talk to you about the how we're biased against anonymous editors. So the Italian word which is literally not a laughing matter. So it turns out that we deploy these things for Wikipedians, and they realize, like, oh wow, this makes mistakes sometimes, we should start recording those mistakes. I didn't tell them to do this, they just realized that this was an obvious thing thing that they should do. And so what I'm showing you now is a screenshot from Italian Wikipedia where they're discussing specific types of mistakes that the system was making. On the very top, you can see Rotpunkt telling me, like, hey, by the way, we have a bunch of false positives related to the Italian verb for have. So what was going on here was that we don't just have bad words like racial slurs and that sort of stuff that we put into the model. We also have informals, such as, and informals are casual speak that would not be welcome on the article, but would be welcome in a discussion, such as hello or ha ha ha. You can see where I'm going with this. So ha ha, it turns out, is a problem. People vandalize in English on all of the wikis. And so we use our English language bad words and informalists everywhere. It turns out that in our informalist from English, we have a regular expression that matches ha and ha ha ha. And that was catching ah in Italian Wikipedia. And so it turns out that ha is laughing in English and ah is not laughing in Italian. So it turns out that once this was reported to us, it was a really easy problem to fix. We could just remove that one informal word from use in Italian Wikipedia, keep all of the rest of the English informal words, and dramatically improve the model. We would have never seen that unless people were auditing the system for us. Yeah, I think I can make it through anonymous editors. I'm going to be a little bit quick about this, so apologies for going really fast. So it turns out we were getting a bunch of reports that when people aren't logged in and they're making edits, the system is flagging that as vandalism all the time. We should probably do something about that. But maybe anons are really bad. Maybe they're actually just vandalizing all the time. Generally, anonymous editors are twice as likely to be vandalizing Wikipedia. However, 90% of their edits are good, so we should probably not flag all of them as bad. So it turns out that you can use ORs and inject features into it. And so you can ask ORs something like, if this edit was saved by an anonymous editor, what would the score be? If it was saved by not an anonymous editor, everything else held constant, what would the score be? And so you can find out that this particular edit is 11.5% more likely to be considered damaging if it was saved by an anonymous editor, but we changed nothing else about the edit. Haha, ORs has a bias. So you actually have to change a few more of the features in order to put this in place because, you know, anonymous editors don't have a registration date and all that sort of stuff. So I built 3 user classes and tested out 2 different modeling strategies to see if I could figure out what was going on here. One of the user classes is an anonymous editor, one is a new editor who just registered, and the other one's me, epoch fail. So the 2 modeling strategies are a gradient boosting strategy and a linear SVM strategy. So this is not trying to affect the data at all, just looking at our test set. So what we want to see is that the not damaging edits have low probability, are squished up against the left, and the edits that are damaging have high probability, are squished up against the right. Yeah, the right. It's hard when I'm, you know, but we see a little bit of a weird thing under the linear SVM model. There's this weird bump of edits that aren't damaging with a high probability. What the heck is going on there? Well, we're going to figure that out in just a second. So now let's ask the system, how would these graphs look if every single edit was saved by an anonymous editor? Well, we can see something quite dramatic here. So under the gradient boosting model, we see that most of the damaging or not damaging edits are up against the left. Most of the damaging edits are up against the right. But for the linear SVM model, all of the edits are up against the right with this super big spike at about 80% likely to be damaging. What the heck? Well, okay, that's for anons. What about for newcomers? It turns out that it's roughly the same story. The model learned roughly the same thing for newcomers. Still, the gradient boosting model does a pretty good job of discriminating between damage and not damage, even if it looks like every edit came from a newcomer. However, the linear SVM model still has a very similar problem. Not quite 80%, more like 75%, but still has this big problem here. All right, now let's ask, what if every edit was saved by an experienced editor like me? Remember, I'm not changing anything about the edit, just who saved it. It turns out that everything is squished up against the left. We generally draw our thresholds at about 0.5 for likely to be needing review, and so that means that I can get away with vandalizing Wikipedia. Mwahahaha, this was part of my design the whole time. So really, this was a great problem to understand, and we didn't quite fix it entirely, as you can see in that last slide. However, we realized that a gradient boosting strategy was just far better at discriminating in these cases, and it wasn't so biased against anonymous editors. So we deployed that around December of 2015, but it still needs work. There's still a bias against anonymous editors and newcomers. It's not gone, and so we've been digging into sources of signal that have nothing to do with the person who's making the edit and more to do with the changes that they're making, such as hashing vectorization and probabilistic context-free grammars and natural language processing strategy. Okay. So I just want to summarize the stuff that I've told you today. So in part 1, we talked about Wikipedia as a socio-technical system, brought in that systems thinking, biological metaphors. Part 2, talked to you about the quality control system. We talked about standpoint epistemology and how we're throwing out the baby with bathwater. And then finally, in part 3, talked about how I see this new system, this new machine learning system, as infrastructure for socio-technical change, this idea of a progress catalyst, and talked to you about how we can address some of the dangers of subjective algorithms by having an open auditing space where people can talk to us about them. Thank you.
We have a few minutes that we can have the questions and discussion. I'll start. So it seems like even if we were to add a new perspective, for example, that we can socialize newcomers, that doesn't necessarily guarantee how those various subjectivities are integrated into a whole. That is, like, you could still believe, like, maybe Geza believes that we need to have newcomers. I'm like, well, you know what? It actually is much more important to Wikipedia's overall perception that we don't have incorrect information, so vandalism is more important. It seems like you could essentially, then the extant power structures essentially determine, you know, I'm going to block it, even if it's eventually going to throttle Wikipedia into non-existence. So just the fact that we've all agreed that newcomers are a problem, I feel like that's sort of like saying we know racism is a problem, but it's still like the existing sort of norms will often overpower the desire to try and do something that might make life harder for people who currently have certain environments.
Right.
How do we actually make progress there?
Right, and so like it would be very. Like I don't like to use this term because it's like whatever. It would be very patriarchal of me to show up and say, no, this is important. This is what we're going to do, and I know what to do, and we're going to do this. And I actually tried that. It was part of my thesis. It was that snuggle tool I was talking about, and mostly didn't work. People thought about things differently because I made a tool that was focused on newcomer socialization, but it didn't really get adopted. Didn't really fix the problem. So a more empowerment approach would be to say, like, well, I'm going to try and make it so that we're reducing barriers so more people can participate in this conversation. And I really do see like a technical innovation space as a conversation. Like, for example, like take the app market. When somebody makes an app that does something new, there's suddenly 10 more apps that are taking advantage of that thing. Well, assuming that it was good. There are a lot of apps that do something new and it was bad and nobody cared about it and nobody does it anymore. But the really cool thing is that, you know, just like a meme, the concepts, the design and affordances of these apps will start to proliferate, and suddenly, if it's such a good idea, maybe all the apps suddenly do it. Like sharing things on Facebook, we can debate about how good of an idea that it is, but it'll certainly make you ad revenue. But in this case, what I'm really hoping to do with this is open up the conversation. And so my hope is that people who couldn't enter the conversation before will now enter the conversation. But I'm not able to say what they'll do when they enter the conversation. And so I'm sort of making a bet that I think that this problem is serious, and I think that talking about it openly will help people add that to their standpoint, their notion of value. But I really am leaving it up to them about what they're going to do with that, what they're going to do with this new entrance to the conversation. And in a way, this is not great because they could not solve the problem. But in another way, like maybe I'm actually wrong about what the real problem is, and somebody else will have an insight into what the real problem is, and now I've still opened the door for them, and they're able to operate in this space, the space that they couldn't operate in before. And so what we're seeing a lot of is most of these tools that I was talking about are not developed by people with extensive computer science backgrounds. It turns out that Huggle is about 20,000 lines of code, and as soon as we deployed the service, somebody made a thing that does roughly what Huggle does in about 80 lines of JavaScript. And so like it's phenomenal, like the difference that this makes for like people experimenting in this space. And so we've seen like the conversation definitely has expanded beyond the people that were involved in it before, or the types of people who were involved in it before, but it's still a bet for what they're going to do with it. My hope is that either they're going to do what I hope that they'll do with it, or they're going to do something that's actually better than that I was too stupid to see.
It seems like it's a harder conversation than that, because like, let's say I could minimize vandalism for you easily reject all edits from people who have not been on Wikipedia for at least 3 years or something like this. Like basically close off all new signups. And then you start to open the fire hose more and more. And I feel like at the end of the day, the conversation is how much more work are you willing to do today in order to benefit like socialization? And that seems like that has to be a cultural shift that happens across Wikipedia. And I don't know how in a decentralized organization like the Wikipedia editors that kind of cultural shift. It's like, yep, it's worth it to us that we will do more work in order to support newcomers.
Right. I struggle with that too. Like it's much easier for me to look at shifting the technology than it is to shifting culture because that's been an open area of study for forever, as long as social science. But my bet is by getting new people in the door, that's a strong way to shift culture. But I guess one thing that this benefits from is at the end of the day, we want encyclopedia content. And it turns out, let's say that we just banned anonymous editors. I've looked into this. We would lose about 20% of our productivity. And so then you get to ask the question, is doing quality control worth 20% of productivity, like doing 27 hours of quality control a day? And the answer is, if I talk to people about that in Wikipedia, they're like, oh yeah, obviously. And I think it's that way for newcomers too. People see that, but the problem is you can't have a personal interaction with everybody who shows up in Wikipedia. But we can do things with ORs, and I've already been experimenting with this for targeting newcomers who are most in need of support, the most likely to be productive just based on their initial excitement about Wikipedia, not the quality of their work, and the least likely to actually be vandals who will just waste your time if you try and go have an interaction with them. Right now we don't have that, and so we're not even taking advantage of those few but key places where we could have a big effect. And so that's where I think technology could help. That's where I think the innovation space might move. But you're right, we can't do everything, but we can optimize for the things that we've never been able to optimize for before.
You're trying to achieve with empowerment, which is leveraging the intelligence of others and fostering this dialogue. Open source has been trying to do that for a long time too. What do you think are the most significant innovations of this technological empowerment model from the just basic vanilla open source model?
So a lot of open source is really about opening the door but not paving the way. So in order to work with this open source project, you might have to learn how makefiles work, and you're going to have to learn about this culture, and you're going to have to learn about how to use a command line interface and that sort of stuff. And so I would say this is much more paving the way than it is just opening the door. Anybody could build a machine learning model and run a bot on Wikipedia before. This is much more like building a bridge so that they don't have to go through this terrifying valley or over this huge mountain in order to do that sort of thing. And so considering the rest of the open source world, I see something like Jupyter Notebooks a lot like how I see ORs. Jupyter Notebooks paves the way for people to learn data science strategies, among other things that you can do with them, but I think that that's a really killer use case. If you're not familiar with Jupyter Notebooks, they're like a web-based interface that allows you to write, say, Python or R, or statistical languages, programming languages, without having to install anything. Like Jupyter Hub, for example, will let you run the entire thing on a remote server. You don't have to learn about command line interfaces or installation dependencies. You can just open a web browser and start writing Python. And so you're not paving the way entirely. It's not, you can't just show up and be like, I am a data scientist. You're going to have to learn Python. You're going to have to learn statistical methods. But there's a huge mountain of other crap that you don't need to even start with before you get involved in data science. And so yeah, that's where I would draw the line between ORs and Jupyter versus just open source and open bug trackers and pull requests.
So I've heard a number of hypotheses about these cultural causes for the decline of Wikipedia after 2008, including, for example, things like the rise of deletionism and like that kind of thing. And it occurs to me that this could probably be very easily studied in the context of comparing different kinds of different language Wikipedias because they obviously have different cultures. Yeah. Is this anything you looked into?
Yeah. So a lot of other Wikipedias look exactly like English Wikipedia, especially German Wikipedia. German Wikipedia arguably has a more deletionist, quality-focused culture, and they use these tools much more aggressively towards new editors, and they have an even more aggressive decline. Whereas Japanese Wikipedia is much more open, much less focused on quality, much more any sort of pop culture topic is welcome to be written about in the encyclopedia. and they don't have a decline that looks like this. They have something that looks much more like an early late adopter curve, where it's like logistic growth that flattens out, doesn't it doesn't collapse over time. And so yeah, we definitely see this in different languages. And there's a study that I know is coming out soon that I don't think is out yet that looked at this pattern of focusing on quality control and then having this decay of newcomer socialization and therefore newcomer retention across wikiyas, which are Wiki is sort of like a space for hosting hobby wikis. So like the Battlestar Galactica wiki and the Star Wars wiki and that sort of stuff are in this space, and they exhibit very similar patterns. So it seems like this pattern of focusing on quality and forgetting about newcomer socialization is really common. What my hope is with this work, we can maybe stop doing that, or at least make that shift lesser and lesser. We can still figure out how we can optimize for all of it, optimize for quality control and still have newcomer socialization. And so maybe like new communities won't go through such a hard shift where they have this problem, or maybe even the old communities like English Wikipedia might be able to recover substantially.
All right, let's thank our speaker.
Yeah.